The night before my son's wedding, I sat at my kitchen table, counting what was left in my checking account. And I remember thinking that I would do it all over again if it meant he'd be happy. I didn't know yet that the happiness I was buying wasn't mine to keep. My name doesn't matter much in the story, but the people in it do, so I'll tell you who we were. I raised my son alone in a narrow house in Cedar Falls, the kind of place where the floors creak in the same 3 spots every winter. My husband passed when our boy Wesley was 11. A bad heart, the doctors said, the kind that runs quiet for years, and then takes a man between one breath and the next while he's standing at the bathroom sink. I found him there on a Tuesday morning. I had a load of laundry in my arms. I still remember the smell of the detergent, lavender, and how strange it was that something could smell so clean on the worst day of my life. After that, it was just the 2 of us. I worked at the county hospital in the billing department for 31 years. It wasn't glamorous work. I sat in a windowless room and untangled insurance claims, fought with companies that didn't want to pay, and most days I came home with a headache and swollen ankles. But it was steady. It paid for the braces, the band trips, the second-hand car when Wesley turned 16. It paid for the application fees when he started looking at colleges and when his financial aid fell short the spring of his senior year. I took a second job on weekends ringing up groceries so he could go to the school he wanted instead of the one we could afford. I want to be honest with you here, because if I'm not honest at the start, then none of the rest of this will mean anything. I gave him everything. Not because he was greedy as a boy, he wasn't. He was sweet. He used to leave little notes in my lunch bag when he was small, drawings of the 2 of us holding hands with the sun in the corner. I gave him everything because I was afraid. I was afraid that losing his father had already taken too much from him, and I thought if I just gave enough, worked enough, sacrificed enough, I could fill the hole that his dad left behind. I see now that you cannot fill grief with money. You can only teach a child that love looks like a person who never says no. Wesley grew up clever. He got into engineering, the real kind, the kind with a hard hat and a 6-figure salary by the time he was 30. He moved to Denver and did well for himself. I was proud. Lord, I was so proud. I tell the women in my Bible study about his promotions, and they'd nod and smile, and I felt for a moment like all those headaches and swollen ankles had added up to something. He met her at a conference. Brielle. I'll be fair to her where I can, because bitterness is a poison, and I've spent too long already drinking it. She was beautiful and ambitious, and she came from a family with money, the inherited kind, the kind that summers somewhere and has opinions about which fork you use. Her father ran a development firm. Her mother sat on charity boards and wore her wealth like perfume, just enough that you'd notice without being told. When Wesley brought her home for the first time, she looked at my little house the way you'd look at a museum exhibit about how poor people used to live. Polite, curious, glad it wasn't her. The wedding talk started about a year into their engagement. I remember the phone call started about a year into their engagement. Wesley was excited, talking fast, and I was happy just to hear him happy. Then he mentioned the venue, a restored estate up in the mountains, the kind of place that books 2 years out and charges by the head like it's auctioning livestock. He mentioned the guest list, 300 people, most of whom I'd never met. He mentioned the band, the florist who flew in peonies from somewhere I couldn't pronounce, the late-night taco truck, the welcome bags for out-of-town guests. And then, gently, the way you'd ask someone to pass the salt. He asked if I could help. Now, I need to tell you the truth about my finances, because the people who watch these stories always want to know, and they're right to ask. I was not rich. I want to be clear about that, but I was not as poor as my house made me look. Years before, when my own mother passed, I'd inherited a duplex over in Rockton. 2 units, nothing fancy, but I rented them out and the income was real. I had also been saving 31 years of direct deposit into a pension, a modest 401k, the equity in the duplex. By the time I retired, I had something close to $240,000 to my name, which to a woman who'd clipped coupons her whole life felt like a fortune. It was supposed to be my old age, my cushion, the thing that meant I'd never have to call my son and ask him for money, because I had watched my own mother do that and I had seen how it bent her. The wedding came to $180,000. I didn't pay it all at once, and I want to explain how it happened, because nobody ever decides to ruin themselves in a single afternoon. It happens in increments. First, it was the deposit. Then it was the dress, because Brielle found the one and her parents were, in Wesley's words, stretched a little thin that quarter, which I later learned meant they put money into a vineyard. Then it was the catering deposit, then the balance on the venue, because the date was approaching and they didn't want to lose it. Each time I said yes, I told myself it was the last yes. Each time I moved money from savings, I told myself I'd make it back somehow. Toward the end, when the savings ran low and the bills kept coming, I took out a line of credit against the duplex. I did that quietly. I didn't tell anyone. I was 63 years old, and I signed a loan against the only thing my mother ever left me, so that my son could have peonies flown in from across an ocean. I told myself it was love. I think it was fear wearing love's coat. The months before the wedding, I felt myself shrinking. There were dress fittings I wasn't invited to. There was an engagement party at Brielle's parents' home, and I sat on a leather sofa that cost more than my car while her mother introduced me to a circle of women as Wesley's mom. She used to work at a hospital. Worked at, as if I were a fact from history. I smiled and held my wine that I didn't drink, and I felt the distance between me and my own son, stretching like taffy, thinning, until I could almost see through it. I told myself it was wedding stress. I told myself once the day passed, things would settle. He'd come back to me, my boy who drew suns in the corner of the page. The rehearsal dinner was the first real crack. They held it at a steakhouse downtown, the kind with valets and a wine list bound in leather. I arrived in the nicest dress I owned, navy, with the little jacket I bought on sale and steamed 3 times that morning so it would look right. When I got there, I went looking for my seat. There was a head table for the wedding party and the immediate family. Brielle's parents were there. Her grandmother was there. There was a seat with Wesley's name and a seat with Brielle's name. There was no seat for me. I stood at the edge of that room in my steamed navy jacket and I watched a young woman with a clipboard frown at her list, and then walk me to a small table near the kitchen doors, where the waiters came in and out with their trays, where I sat with a cousin of the bride's and an elderly aunt who was hard of hearing and kept asking me to repeat myself. I told myself it was an oversight. 300 guests. Things get missed. I told myself my son would notice and come find me. He didn't come find me. He was laughing at the head table, his arm around his bride, and once, just once, his eyes passed over me where I sat by the kitchen, and I saw him see me, and I saw him decide it was easier not to. That was the moment, if I'm honest, that I should have understood what was coming. But a mother's heart is a stubborn thing. It will explain away almost anything. I went home that night and I steamed my dress for the wedding, and I did not let myself cry, because I didn't want puffy eyes in the photographs. The wedding was held on a Saturday in late September, the kind of gold afternoon that makes you believe in things. The estate was beautiful, I'll give it that. The money I'd spent was everywhere I looked, in the arch of flowers, in the string quartet, in the way the light caught the crystal on 300 place settings. I came early because I didn't know what else to do with my nerves. I wore the navy. I'd had my hair set. A young man with an earpiece checked my name against a list and walked me to my seat for the ceremony. Not the front row. Not the second. He walked me back, past the rows of Brielle's family in their pale silks, past faces I didn't know, all the way to the 5th row, where I sat beside a co-worker of Wesley's I'd met exactly once. In the front row, in the seat where the mother of the groom sits at every wedding I have ever attended in my 63 years, sat Brielle's mother. They had given my seat to her, the woman whose family had been stretched a little thin. She wore lavender, and she turned around once and gave me a small wave, the kind you give a stranger you recognize from somewhere. I watched my son get married from the 5th row. I watched the back of his head. When the officiant spoke about the families joining together, about the mothers who'd raised these 2 children, the photographer crouched in the aisle and turned his lens toward the front row, toward the lavender woman, and she dabbed at her eyes, and the camera loved her. And somewhere, on a memory card, there's a photograph of the wrong woman crying that will end up in my son's wedding album. I did not cry. I had used up my crying in the parking lot. The reception is where it broke open. There were speeches. The best man spoke. The maid of honor spoke. Brielle's father stood and gave a long, warm toast about welcoming Wesley into a family that takes care of its own, and there was laughter and applause, and glasses lifted all across that golden room. I waited. Surely there would be a moment. Surely my son, who I had carried and fed and worried over for 33 years, who I had gone into debt for, would stand and say something, anything, about the woman who got him here. He stood. My heart lifted like a fool's heart does. He thanked Brielle's parents for their incredible generosity in making this day possible. Their generosity. I sat very still. I felt the blood leave my face. The whole room was nodding and smiling at Brielle's mother and father, toasting their generosity, the generosity that I had paid for, that I had borrowed against my mother's duplex to provide, and not one person in that room knew it, because my son had let them believe it. I don't fully remember standing up. I think some part of me decided before the rest of me caught up. I found myself walking toward the head table, and the room sort of quieted the way rooms do when something is about to go wrong. And Wesley saw me coming. His face did something I'll never forget. It wasn't love, and it wasn't even shame. Not at first. It was annoyance. The flicker of a man being interrupted. I got close enough to speak, and I said his name quietly. Just his name. I think I meant to do it privately. I think even then I was trying to protect him. And he looked at me, in front of his new wife and her family and 300 guests, and he said, low, but not low enough. Not now. Please don't make this about you. About me. Then Brielle leaned toward him and murmured something, and he straightened, and he said the thing I have carried in my chest like a stone ever since. He said, honestly, I wish you'd just blend in for once. I wish for one day I didn't have to manage you. Manage me. The room had gone silent. The quartet had stopped between songs. 300 faces turned toward us, and I stood there in my steam navy jacket, 63 years old, $180,000 poorer, and I understood, finally, completely what I had spent my whole life refusing to understand. He was not embarrassed of the wedding. He was embarrassed of me. The woman at the hospital, the woman in the Navy from the sail rack, the reminder of where he came from, sitting like a stain in the middle of the life he was trying to marry into. I straightened my back. I have a memory of my own mother doing the same thing once, in a doctor's office, when a man spoke to her like she was simple. The same straightening. It must be in the blood. And I said, in a voice that did not shake, which surprised me, you're right, you won't have to manage me. Not today. Not ever again. I set down the small gift I'd been carrying, an envelope, and I turned and I walked out of that golden room, past the lavender woman, past the peonies that I crossed an ocean, past 300 strangers, and out into the September evening. Nobody followed me. I drove myself home. I remember the radio was playing something cheerful and I let it. Here's the part the story usually leaves out, the part that matters most. Walking away is not revenge. I want to be clear about that, because I know how these stories get told. Like the satisfying thing is the comeback, the moment the other person's face falls. His face did fall. I saw it, and I felt nothing but tired. The real story is what I did in the weeks after. I called a lawyer, a sensible woman who specialized in elder finances, and I sat in her office and laid out my whole foolish year, the line of credit, the drained savings, the duplex with a loan against it I could barely service on my pension. She didn't lecture me. She just helped me make a plan. We refinanced. I sold the duplex. Finally, the thing I'd protected so hard, and it broke my heart to do it, but the sale cleared the debt and left me a little besides. I downsized to a one-bedroom apartment with good light and a balcony just big enough for 2 chairs and a tomato plant. I learned, at 63, to stop measuring love by what it cost me. And I learned to say a word I had never properly used with my son. No. He called, eventually. About 6 weeks after the wedding, when the photos came back and he saw, I suppose, all those pictures of the wrong mother in the front row. He called and he was angry first, the way people get angry when they're actually ashamed. He said I'd humiliated him. He said I'd made a scene. He said the envelope I'd left, which contained the deed and a note explaining what I'd given and what it had cost me, had upset Brielle's parents terribly. I let him talk. When he was done, I said, I love you. I will always love you. But I am not going to apologize for finally telling the truth. You spent my retirement and called it someone else's generosity. I am not angry that you didn't thank me. I am heartbroken that you are ashamed of me. There is a difference, and you'll understand it someday. Then I told him I needed time, and I hung up, and I did not call him back for a long while. That was the hardest no of my life. The seasons turned. I built a small life, and I found, to my own astonishment, that I liked it. I joined a walking group. I made a friend named Pearl who'd buried 2 husbands and laughed louder than anyone I knew. I started volunteering at the literacy center downtown, teaching grown men and women to read, and I cannot tell you what it did for me to watch a 50-year-old man read a street sign for the first time. Some evenings on my little balcony with my tomato plant and a glass of iced tea, I felt something I hadn't felt in 30 years. I felt like myself. Not somebody's mother, not somebody's source of money. Myself. Wesley and I did not speak for almost a year. And then the following August, he called and his voice was different. Smaller. He told me Brielle was pregnant, a girl. And then there was a long silence on the line, and then my 34-year-old son started to cry. The way he used to cry as a little boy when he'd done something he couldn't undo. He said, "Mom, I've been thinking about the kind of father I want to be, and I keep thinking about the kind of son I was. I'm so sorry. I don't even know how to say it big enough. You gave me everything, and I let them all think it came from somebody else. I was ashamed of the one person who never once gave me a reason to be." I let him cry. I didn't rush to comfort him the way I once would have. The way that taught him his comfort was always more important than my truth. I just listened, and when he was done I said, "I forgive you. But forgiveness and trust are 2 different things, and we're going to have to build the second one slow." And we did, slow. We started with phone calls on Sundays, then a visit, just him, no Brielle. Or he sat in my little apartment and ate the pot roast I used to make him, and looked around at my good light walls and my balcony, and he said it was the nicest place he'd ever been. He didn't try to give me money. He'd learned, finally, that I didn't want his money. I wanted to be seen. Brielle and I will never be close. I've made my peace with that, but she did a thing I didn't expect. When the baby came, a little girl with a startling amount of dark hair, they named her after my mother. Not after the lavender woman. After my mother, the one whose duplex paid for a wedding nobody thanked me for. Wesley told me later that he'd insisted that it was the one thing he was sure of. The first time they put that baby in my arms, in a hospital room not unlike the one where I'd untangled insurance claims for 31 years, I looked down at her face and I thought about all the love I'd poured out like water into ground that couldn't hold it. And I thought, no, this time it's different. This time I'll love her without erasing myself. I'll be a whole grandmother, not a sacrifice one. I'll teach her, when she's old enough, that loving people does not mean disappearing for them. I'm 71 now. I still have the tomato plant, or rather its many descendants. Wesley calls every Sunday, and he means it. We talk about real things. He tells his daughter stories about me that make me sound braver than I was. And sometimes, when she visits, she draws me pictures. The other day she left one on my counter. 2 stick figures holding hands with a big yellow sun in the corner. And I had to sit down for a minute, because I'd seen that picture before, a long time ago, in a lunch bag. And it had taken me a whole lifetime in one terrible wedding to learn that the love in it was always supposed to go both ways. For a long time after that wedding, I kept asking myself how a sweet boy who left drawings in my lunch bag could grow into a man who introduced my sacrifice as somebody else's generosity. The answer, when I finally let myself see it, was harder on me than on Wesley. He didn't become ashamed of me by accident. I taught him, one yes at a time, that my needs came last and his comfort came first. Every loan I took quietly, every no I swallowed, every time I shrank myself to make him bigger, I was writing the rules he'd live by. Children don't become who we tell them to be. They become who we show them they can get away with being. The cause was mine long before the effect arrived at that head table. What saved me wasn't anger, and it certainly wasn't revenge. The night I walked out of that golden room, I didn't feel powerful. I felt tired. The real turning came weeks later, in a lawyer's office, when I finally found the backbone to look at the whole foolish year without flinching, and to do the hard, unglamorous work of fixing it. Selling my mother's duplex broke my heart, but it took a kind of steadiness I didn't know I still had to sign those papers and walk into a smaller life on purpose. That steadiness, the willingness to do the difficult things slowly and without applause, is what rebuilt me. Nobody hands you that. You earn it one uncomfortable decision at a time. And there was a wiser way of seeing I had to learn too. I had spent 63 years confusing love with sacrifice, thinking the size of what I gave up proved the size of how I cared. It doesn't. Real love has eyes open. It can tell the difference between helping a child stand and carrying a grown man on your back until your own spine gives out. Learning to say no to Wesley was not cruelty. It was the first honest thing I'd given him in years, because it finally treated him like the capable adult he was instead of the wound I was still trying to bandage. If you take anything from an old woman's mistakes, let it be this. Be good to the people you love, but never so good that you erase yourself, because a person who disappears teaches everyone around them that they were never really there. Use your head as much as your heart, and ask honestly whether what you call generosity is building someone up or quietly tearing you down. And when the truth finally arrives, find the strength to face it and change, even if changing costs you the thing you protected longest. Wesley came back to me in the end, crying on the phone about the kind of father he wanted to be. But he only came back because I'd finally become someone worth coming back to, a whole person standing on her own 2 feet, holding her granddaughter, loving her at last without vanishing.